Hey, Clayton, who in the world is Melchizedek, and why does Hebrews make such a big deal out of him? Yes, I love obscure Old Testament references. Melchizedek is mentioned in Hebrews chapter 5, 6, and 7 quite a few times. There's a lot of discussion about him. But here's the really curious thing. He is mentioned only two times in the rest of the Bible, in the Old Testament. Let me share those two times. The first is in Genesis chapter 14. In this story, Abraham, who at that time was called Abram, he gets into a fight. There's a battle between his people and some other groups that are in the area, and he wins the battle. And he takes a whole bunch of plunder, a bunch of spoil from the battle, and he is celebrating after the battle, and he is near the city of Salem, which eventually becomes Jerusalem. And in his gratitude to God for his provision, he is having this kind of worship service. And it says this: Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High, and he blessed Abram, saying, Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand. Then Abram gave him a tenth of everything. And that's it. That's all we've got. That's the whole story. All we know about this guy is he was a minor king in the land of Canaan 2,000 years before Jesus, and he happened to be a priest that held a worship service and blessed Abram. That's what we got. The other mention of Melchizedek in the Old Testament is in Psalm 110. Psalm 110 is this worship song among this group of worship songs, and the psalmist kind of throws in this random mention of this obscure character in the book of Genesis. And it's a little bit like, I don't know if you know the song Come Thou Fount. We sing that at our church. And there is a verse in Come Thou Fount where it says, Here I raise my Ebenezer. And you're like, what's an Ebenezer? Ebenezer sounds like, Ebenezer Scrooge from the Christmas Carol. But it's actually a reference to a very obscure Old Testament passage, and we don't need to explain that here, but it's like this really deep cut. Or it's like, if you've ever seen the play Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, it is a play where they take Hamlet, the story of Hamlet, and tell it from the perspective of two really obscure characters, just kind of throwaway background characters, named Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Or it's like if you were a fan of Star Wars when, before all of the new movies came out, there were all of these characters that were in the original trilogy, the weird aliens that are in the background of the cantina and all of these different bounty hunters and whatever. And they aren't big deals in the movie, but they're background characters. But throughout the ages, there have been people who've written fan fiction, or there are novels or comic books or short stories that fill in the backstory and give names to all of these people. It's almost like the psalmist is like, you know what? I'm really into this one obscure guy that's in the background of this one scene of this one movie. He's Melchizedek. And so you got to ask the question, why would the psalmist in Psalm 110 mention this guy? Psalm 110 is a song about an ideal king, a victorious king, a king who has won a battle and is now seated at the right hand of God. It's this ideal image of what would a good ruler look like. And it turns out that the ideal king is also a priest. Now, this was normal in the ancient world. Priest kings were a typical thing in most cultures around Israel, but this was not true in the land of Israel. In Israelite culture, priests were from one tribe. They were from the tribe of Levi and from the family of Aaron, and the kings were from the tribe of Judah, from the family of David, and there was no mixing. You could not be both of those things. And so they were always separate. You always had priests over here, kings over here, and it was a little bit of separation of powers, right? Don't consolidate all of that power into one person. Keep them separate. But there were some kings that got close to combining them. David was one of those. There are stories about David where he is writing worship songs, he is building a temple, he is offering sacrifices, and he starts to act a little bit like a priest. So there's something there that says, wow, our ideal king started to bring those two things together. But the psalmist is imagining a future where a new king, a different kind of king, shows up and brings the priesthood and the kingship together. And so as he's writing the song, imagining this day, thinking about this day, he's thinking, is there a king in the Bible who's also a priest? And he finds this deep cut in Genesis 14, Melchizedek. So he uses him as an image of this ideal priest king. Now, the book of Hebrews, it turns out, is a sermon on Psalm 110. We don't always know all the references of the Old Testament quotes, but this is the one that's quoted over and over and over again the most in the book of Hebrews. And it's applied to Jesus. He is the idealized king. He's the fulfillment of this psalm. And he's not just the fulfillment of the kingship, he's also the fulfillment of the priesthood. The problem, though, is Jesus is from the line of David, so he's rightfully a king, but he's not from the line of Aaron. He is not a Levite, so he cannot be a priest. So the author of Hebrews picks up on this detail from Psalm 110 about Melchizedek, goes back to Genesis and starts to unpack all of these things and shows how Jesus is like Melchizedek, not like the priest that descended from Aaron. And he picks up on all of these little details about Melchizedek. He doesn't have a genealogy, so we don't know where he came from, and he doesn't have a death that's reported. So it seems like he lives forever. It's not saying he really lived forever, but sort of in a literary sense, there's no beginning and no end to this guy, just like there's no beginning and end to Jesus. So he makes all of these connections. Now we might say, what's the big deal about this? Why dig into this? I don't really care what tribe Jesus came from. I don't really care, where the priests come from or the kings come from. Like, I'll just believe it when you tell me he's a priest. But they cared in the first century. In fact, there were lots of debates, lots of political debates about the legitimacy of the priests in the temple at the time. And there were a few times when there were people who were in the kingly role in Israel, just a few hundred years before Jesus, where they also took on the priesthood. And there was controversy about that. And there was controversy about the high priest in Jesus' time. And so this was an open discussion. This would be a little bit like a president who is also claiming to be the chief justice. We'd be like, whoa, you can't combine those two branches of government. They're meant to be separate and to be checks and balances. And so for the people in the first century, they're like, oh, this is a live debate. How can Jesus be priest and be king? That's not a thing in our system that works. And so the author of Hebrews is digging into all of these things. So here's the question. What does this have to do with you and me? You might be saying, I don't really care about all of these technicalities. It doesn't bother me, whether or not he's a priest or a king or the Judah or Levi or where it comes from. These are not things I'm worried about. So how important is it for me to understand this Melchizedek stuff, really? And I kind of want to say not much, okay? It's not super practical that you understand all of the details, but here's where it pays off. This is a window into the all-encompassing authority and effectiveness of Jesus. It's a way of saying Jesus is the total package, right? Everything that you need. If you need a king to rule and to defend you and to be just and all of these things, you've got a king. When you need a priest, someone who's going to intercede for you and make sure your sins are forgiven and give you access to the presence of God, you've got a priest. You've got the whole package in Jesus. You don't need two people. You've got one who does it all. His work on the cross is more than enough for anything that you need. Our ascended king can rule over us. Our ascended priest can intercede for us. He can do it all. He is all that we need. You don't need to look anywhere else. Thanks for listening. If you've got your own questions, email questions@BibleSavvy.com. Like and subscribe to catch our regular episodes every Monday on the Bible Savvy Podcast.